Welcome to a slight change in focus here at the Tackle Zone as we move away from focusing purely on Blood Bowl and the tabletop tournament scene towards other games and gaming systems in our quick pass review. And today we start with Warhammer Age of Sigmar Carrion Empire by Games Workshop, Inhuman Horrors Clash Over Ancient Glories. And in this case the Inhuman Horrors are the Flesh Eater Courts against the Skaven. So the thing to start with for me is to look at this box art, and this is an area where I think Games Workshop have really improved over the last few years, and this cover art I think is a great example of the move that they have made. One of the things I like in particular is the tri-colour focus of this composition. As we see the red of the ghoul's fur from the Flesh Eater Courts against the rather untraditional blue armour of the Skaven Stormfiends here against a green background. And whilst a more luminous green like this is quite in keeping with the Skaven colour scheme, this particular blend of green is a more neutral balance between red and blue. And by that, let's have a look at a colour wheel. So here we are with a colour wheel from Sessions College, and the important thing to do first is switch into RGB mode. So that will give us the correct trichromatic scheme that they're using. And then we need to select one of the colours, so let's go for a red here. And it's important to get the right tone of red, so you see this is a little bit too much on the orange side, so let's make that a deeper red. Here we go, and then we have to collect the bases for it, so we're going to go for a triadic to get the spread of points out as far as possible. And here you see blue and green appear, so these are on opposite sides. So if we were looking on a red-blue spectrum, then green would be opposite, it wouldn't exist anywhere on that. So with this green being rather neutral on the red-blue spectrum, I think that it helps the illustration to really make stand out who exactly is fighting. So we've got effectively a red versus blue, and the neutral green background makes me think that this is not either home territory, that both of these forces are out looking for trouble and have just clashed against each other. So I think that's a really strong composition that helps you to fully understand exactly what's going on. So let's move over to the back of the box here. And this is very much the selling part of the box. And I think that Games Workshop do a really good job overall of the pictures on the back of the box. Quite nostalgic in many ways for quite a lot of the things that they produce. This one doesn't actually give me any particular feeling of nostalgia, and I think that's because Flesh Eater Courts is a rather new faction, quite Age of Sigmar specific. But what we can see here is some really good photography, and the setup with the foggy, misty ground really helps to set a kind of an anti-masking neutral back-tone that helps these super saturated painted models stand out even more. Very crisp, the blues in particular coming out really well. Not so much red on the ghouls themselves, we mainly see that on the wings, so there's not quite as much contrast on the main box art, but I think this picture does a really good job of trying to excite you about what you could make it look like if you're a painter with about 100 times as much skill as you actually have. In regard to the contents of the box, it's rather lopsided in the sense that the Skaven, known for being a horde army, really have some elite choices coming out with the Doom Wheel and Lightning Cannon, alongside the Storm Fiends against the mob of ghouls. But I guess what a lot of people will really focus on are these two chaps in the middle, the Abhorrent Archregent from the Flesh Eater Courts against the Warlock Bombardier. So just before we crack into this box, let's get some thoughts for food.
If you think that you're too small to be powerful, remember that even a little halfling gets +7 on a foul with friends.
Thanks for that Pearl of Wisdom, Food, and Food will be joining us in future Quick Pass videos to dispense with his thoughts. So if you have any questions for him, you want to get his thoughts, please write them in the comment below. So let's have a look inside the box. And purely from an aesthetic point of view, from a games design point of view, I have to say that this first impression is actually a little bit underwhelming. Whilst many people will be quite pleased to see the grey plastic and dig straight into it, after all, that's why you've bought the box in the first place. For me, it's just a little bit overwhelming. You know the models are inside. There's not really that wow factor. You open it and it's, well, it's just like everything else, isn't it? So I think they could have done a little bit better there in terms of that wow factor. And certainly when you look at products from other industries, they do a little bit more to sort of build that excitement up. So what have we got inside? Well, we've got some faces. No one cares about those. Let's put that over. We have, on the Skaven side beginning, we have their War Machine, the Lightning Cannon. So one of the things I really like about these sprues, and it's definitely a more recent thing that you see Games Workshop doing, is just how multi-purpose a lot of these kits are. So in addition to having the Warp Lightning Cannon, you also have the Plague Claw here, an artillery piece. So you could, if you wanted to, build the Plague Claw instead. I think I'll definitely go for the Lightning Cannon though. Far more interesting. Now, half of this box is Flesh Eater Courts, but this is a half that I'm not really going to spend a lot of time looking at. In fact, no more time than this, because I'm actually not really interested in the Flesh Eater Courts. The reason why I got this box set was because actually it's one of the few ways to get like a discount from Games Workshop. They don't often do big discounts. In fact, when you look on their web store, a lot of their bundles are actually just all the items that have been individually priced to the same amount. So like many people, I imagine, I got this box set for the Skaven and split the cost with a friend who is getting the Flesh Eater Courts models. And one of the things he was after in particular was this Archregent. So if the camera can zoom in, we see some nice detail on this. You wouldn't expect anything less from Games Workshop. So yeah, that is a nice model. Not really a fan of Flesh Eater Courts, but I do quite like that model actually. And then the character on the other side, the Warlock Bombardier. Yeah, I really like this model. I think his gun in particular is quite ridiculous. Very much in keeping with the techno-babble approach that the Skaven take. If you can be powered with Warpstone, who cares how much is required? Shove it all in there and something will die, even if it's the rat that happens to be using it. So we've got some Storm Fiends as well, and I think Games Workshop are doing a pretty good job. We'll have a bit of a look when it comes to actually looking at their rules in terms of what options the units can take. Is much better suited to what actually comes on the sprue, so you don't feel that you're missing out or that you need to collect lots of sprues to get everything you need. They're far better. Here's the other one. You can see the different weapon options there. So yeah, that's very nice. And then finally the Doom Wheel. So I really like the Doom Wheel. You don't often actually see circles in models. They tend to be more square or obviously humanoid shaped, and circles can actually be quite hard to make, which is why these wheels here sort of come in 3 parts. But yeah, I think it helps the Doom wheel to stand out. Very much an iconic Skaven choice that's been around for quite a while. So let's have a look at the rest of the contents of the box. And when before I was talking about that kind of wow factor in terms of production quality, this is kind of what I'm meaning. This view would have been nice to sort of have on the top. You open the box and then you have this nice inlay, or perhaps even better, and probably what I would have gone for, you have a repeat of the cover itself. So whilst it's a little bit maybe repetitive to take the box off and then be presented with this again, I actually like it, because I think a lot of people will really like the box art. And the great thing about these inlays, they're just card, but they're, you know, the thick card, the high gloss, it's good quality paper. And I can definitely see myself and other people buying a cheap frame and putting that on their wall. I think it's really good. So if that was laid on the top of the box as you opened it, I think that would have a much better initial impact, a bit of a wow factor. So the rest of the box, this is one thing that I really like as well, that you get the core rules immediately. And I think this is important because certainly the modern way of gaming is to try and basically give the rules away for free. Now, rules can't be copyright or trademarked anyway, so it's quite difficult to get people to stop copying that. So the best thing you can actually do is try to give the rules and spread them around as much as possible in order to entice people into taking a look at the game, and then you make the money actually on the high quality products that you produce elsewhere. And I think that Games Workshop sort of gatekeeping the rules by, imagine buying this box set, putting all the miniatures together, and then not knowing how to play and having to spend some money, you know, maybe 30 pounds on some books. Instead, this core rules just comes with everything you need to get going. So yeah, that's great. I think that's a really good move, very positive. Would like to see more of that across the rest of their range. However, I think it's this book out of all the additionals here that for me really makes the difference. And if you're sick and tired of the illustration, then certainly this front cover isn't going to help, but it's great because I think it really zooms in on the key fight of the main illustration. I think it's a great thing to have on the cover of the book as well. And I think we're going to struggle a little bit with just how glossy this paper is. They've certainly put a little bit of money towards getting some good paper to make the quality of this better. I obviously want to make sure that the lights are as bright as possible so that all the detail can be picked out for you guys to see on camera. But that does mean that I am going to struggle a little bit with the glossiness. So I hope to find some angles that let you see. And immediately we've got some great, well, I was going to say lovely, but it's actually quite horrendous, quite disgusting artwork and iconography. And I think this really sets the tone of Flesh Eater Courts. You know, they're not the comedy of the Skaven. They're real kind of horror, definitely pushing that vibe, which I think is really good. Now, on a recent vodcast, and Games Workshop have been producing some really good vodcasts lately. There was an exceptionally interesting one, being Blood Bowl fans, with Jervis Johnson, and he was talking about his work on Age of Sigmar and saying how Games Workshop are very much a model-led company. And whilst I understand that from a business perspective, I've never really thought that that was true. Indeed, more so, I think Games Workshop are a story-based company, and a lot of what they do right, especially in 40k, which now is actually older than Warhammer due to the recent changes with the end times, that they're actually kind of living off of a lot of that storyline that they built up in the late 80s and early 90s. And if you look at a lot of the the books, especially the Games Workshop were producing at that time, they were kind of rule light, lore heavy, lots of storylines, lots of randomness. You really got a much better sense of the world that you inhabited. And I think Games Workshop have realised that certainly when they produced Age of Sigmar for the first time, that mistakes were made. They didn't have the story in place. The setting felt, for me personally, quite bland. Now, I know that some people might say that's an unfair comparison compared to the old world, which had 30 years of history on top of it. But I think that they themselves admitted that, it wasn't really going exactly how they wanted it to. A lot of people weren't really identifying with the new factions, and I think a lot of that was just a general lack of background. Now that's something that they've definitely started to address. The Age of Sigmar 2 rulebook has a lot of good things in it, a lot of maps, and I think that goes a long way towards enriching the feeling that you get, because I think for a lot of people, when you buy into a faction, it's more than just collecting the models. Obviously nice models are very important, but I think it's more of an identity thing, and that identity is really difficult when you don't really understand anything about that faction and how they act. And so it's really good to see all the storyline in here. It's really good to see all this additional artwork that really helps you get a good sense of what exactly is going on. And if I can draw the attention in particular, I really like these icons. They're such a small part of the overall book, but not only do they do a great job obviously of breaking up the text to make it just easier on the eye to read, but I think they're very much in keeping with the rest of the sense that GW are going for. You can see even the side of this book, it's such an easy detail to miss, but even the side of the book has changed as we move away from Flesh Eater Court into Skaven. So I really applaud the move that Games Workshop are taking to try and invest a lot more time in the stories behind. Obviously they've built up a great repertoire of authors through Black Library, and it'd be good to see more and more of those guys get involved, not just with individual stories, but shaping the lore as a whole. So yeah, I really hope you're not bored of this illustration. I think it's great. Again, even here, that's the fourth time we've seen it or part of it, and every time is good. In terms of individual artwork, let's see if I can get this to focus. Having a bit of a difficult time focusing. This is my favourite illustration. This is my favourite bit of artwork in the entire book. I really like the hero poses that Games Workshop go for. Now, when I was younger, I preferred the kind of the mass battles, but I didn't really like the kind of hero side of it. I think it made too much focus on set stories, where for me it was very much around creating your own stories within that setting. But I think what I underestimated was the individual characterization. Now, this obviously is clearly non-human, or at least post-human, but that kind of humanistic level to it, the sort of the marking it out as an individual. You've got all this kind of grand scheme going around, but you've still got individuals and how they can influence things. So yeah, I really like that piece of artwork. I think it's fantastic. Now, it's a shame that we don't actually get the author, the artist credited alongside the artwork. I think that's something that Games Workshop seems to have dropped, and it's not that I have an ethical objection to it, because they are commissioned for the company as a whole, and some people might say, well, why is it fair that some people get more credit in certain places than others, especially if you're a creative person with the text or the rules design. But for me, it's just around trying to learn even who these artists are and try to find more of their work, because I really like this composition. It'd be good to see more of the other things that they've done. So yeah, if you know who this artist is, you can save me a job of finding out, and just write in the comments below would be great. So now we move on to very much what I call the catalogue section of the book. These are all the miniatures that you can buy, or a bit weirdly in this case have already bought. So here we have the crypt ghouls in more detail now. I think this is one of the reasons I don't particularly like the aesthetic of the Crypt Ghouls. I just think their heads stick out a bit too much. I think, yeah, the sculpting here is not really to my liking. Now, that's not to say, you know, I'm not saying if you like it you're wrong. It's just, you know, this is all personal taste. I just think that it doesn't quite work. I think they've gone for something a bit more animalistic, a bit more feral, but for me it just doesn't quite come off in that particular example. Here we are moving on to some Storm Fiends and onto the battle plans. So yeah, this is quite interesting. So this is another thing I think that Games Workshop have done really well, is just expand the number of mission types that you can play. I think it gives the game a lot more replayability. So here's the battle plan Sneak Sneak, and here's the battle plan Steal Steal. Now Skaven are very arrogant, very egocentric, so you know what they say is very important, so that's why they say everything twice. That is canon, guys. You can take that to the bank. And here we go for some War Scroll battalions. So these are extra buffs, and yeah, these just apply to the models in the box, so that's good. So you can put all those models together, you apply the War Scroll battalion on top for a little bit of a buff. So the Skaven here, in the first battle round, roll a dice each time a wound or mortal wound is allocated to a model from this battalion. On a 5+, that wound or mortal wound is negated. So just a little bit of a buff there. And we are on to the War Scrolls for the individual models. Now, let's go back to what I was saying about the Storm Fiends here. So you can see, if it focuses, the different weapon options they've got, and indeed when it's talking about what can be taken, here they are. So that matches what's on the sprue. So there's no sort of buyer's remorse of, are you gonna build your unit in a certain way. It's very flexible around that. So yeah, that's really good. I think this is a really great addition to these box sets, and I really hope that this is something that they continue to do. So just finishing off the rest of the box, we just have some tokens and a couple of rulers here to help out, so that's very nice. And then some instructions, and then one of my favourite parts, which is these individual war scrolls. So I think this is great for actual gaming as well, because you can just use the ones you want in the game, so you're not endlessly flicking through rule books to find out the exact rule. And I think that's really important, because if I had one criticism purely from a design perspective as far as Age of Sigmar is concerned, they did a lot of good work to try and get this line here, which is the basic attack profile, to be as simple as possible. So, well, maybe not in the case of a Warp Lightning Cannon, that's probably a bad example. But let's go on to something a bit more normal in the Crypt Flayers. So you can see that you've got a missile weapon, simple attacks, well, that's got some special rules as well. So yeah, that again is not maybe a good example. But the piercing talents here, you got a number of attacks, you roll to hit, you roll to win. There's no more hit versus hit or strength versus toughness. So it's very, very simple. You can just run through that really quickly. That speeds the game up a lot. But then what did they do with all that time-saving efficiency? They just wrote so many rules below. And you know, certainly if you're playing against someone who has a faction that you're not used to seeing, you know, good luck with that, because things are going to happen that you just don't have any understanding of. Because yeah, it's really difficult to expect people to remember all the rules. But that's a small negative to end on, I guess. Overall, I think this box set is fantastic value. The production quality is really high, and I'd say all of my criticisms were minor tweaks, but definitely they do far more right, and I really applaud the direction that they're going. So looking forward to seeing more of these in future reviews. Thank you for watching. Take care. Well, best thing about Carrion Empire is more Carrion Empire.